Hello, in this episode of Master Your Tools, I'll show you how you can master 3ds Max's Auto-Crease system. So here I just got this basic object, and so this is a prime example for using Auto-Crease because if I turn off data channel, you can see what a nice difference it makes. It saves us the trouble having to always use support loops because they can really be very cumbersome and impossible in many situations. And so it allows us to quickly kind of preview our results before we do our final edge creasing. In some situations, it doesn't give us the optimal result. For example, right here, because of how simple these details are, it just sees these as being sharp angles here, and it sharpens them up. So even though in the final result it'll be more like this, for now I just had to kind of put up with this, but it does give me a good result in many situations, without having to worry about support loops or edge creasing. Alright, so how do we set this up? Well, so you've got your modeling right here, Edit Poly. You simply go ahead and apply the data channel modifier. Then from the presets, you choose Auto Edge Crease Weights. And you click this button to load the preset. So essentially the way this works is that you've got different kind of modifiers here. Edge Input, Curve, Scale, Edge Output. The first thing I like to do is turn off Enable Display. If you're wondering what these colors are, if we open this up, this is giving us information. Blue is where there's minimum of edge creasing happening. Green, there's more, and the red, there's a lot. So it's able to recognize where the sharpest areas are and apply the most creasing there. And you can customize its colors if you want to. But I think it's very confusing to look at, so I just like to turn off the Enable Display. Alright, so essentially what's happening here is you have edge input, so it's looking at the edge angle. You can kind of play around with these as well. You can kind of create your own little presets here. So it's taking the edge angles and it's using this curve on them. So then it's scaling them to 1 and then it's giving us an edge output of crease weights and set to replace. So I can go ahead and close up the display. So we can apply open sublet to see what's actually doing. So let's apply, for example, no more than 3 unless you have a very powerful computer. And it's giving us this right here. Alright, so the first thing I'm noticing is that it's just way too sharp here. So we can go into data channel. And we can go into scale and just bring that down to, let's say, 0.1. That gives us just a less sharp result. Still sharp enough, but just not as extremely sharp as just 1. You can even go to, for example, 0.05 or something just not as sharp. So it just depends on what kind of sharpness you're working with here. If you want like an extremely sharp result or perhaps a little bit smoother as well. Let's go with 0.09. Alright. So then we need to be aware of the curve. So what you'll notice is that although it's capturing a lot of what I want, some parts it's failing on, like right here. So if you look at this, I do want this to be sharp as well as this, but it's just way too smooth here. The angle is not sharp enough for it to register in data channel. So our options are either just kind of tolerate this, or we can go ahead and select, go to Edit Poly, hold Shift, left click, hold Shift, left click. Then we can add a crease to this, like 0.2 for example, and then go into data channel. However, you notice that it didn't really change anything. That's because by default, the edge output is set to replace. So it's replacing everything that's happening on the bottom modifiers. However, if we switch this to add, you can see it's now adding it instead. So to see that in example, in action, if we go to 0, if you right click, it's 0. As we increase this, it's now interactively sharpening it up. So we just want to go ahead and change that, and that gives us more control over some objects. For example, I can do the same for this right here. And let's increase that. There we go. So you notice it is sharpening up some of these edges right here. If I isolate this, it is kind of registering this as sharp, but we can just kind of tolerate that for now. And for example, right here, we can fix that up as well by increasing the crease value, and there we go. And I think right here, if I want this to be sharp, I can increase that to register that. There we go. And it just depends on what you're going for. Maybe if I want this to be sharp right here, I can also select that and sharpen that up, and perhaps this right here. Now, you can also go into the curve control and change this graph right here that will allow you to capture more edges. But the problem is that while we capture these right here, it may also capture lots that you don't want. For example, it will just start sharpening up all these smooth parts. So essentially with this, we can just kind of move this to the right, and notice how it's capturing more and more. So as I go to the right, it's making more and more parts sharp. We can also, for example, bring this down, and notice how it's capturing less and less. Now it's not capturing as much. In fact, you can see it's capturing very little. So you can kind of regulate this a little bit. You can even go ahead and use add a point here. And then, for example, right click, Bezier smooth. And kind of have this. So you can kind of play around with this to get a different result. To fine tune your result and see how it works. In order to see this better, you can go into scale and change that to 1. Go back to curve. And so let's just see how it changes this. Alright, and we'll go back to scale and just kind of start at 0 and then just kind of go up until you get the result that you want. Maybe 0.15, maybe 0.05. Just try different values there. Alright, you also notice that sometimes when you use open subdiv and edge creasing, you get this happening right here. So when you use edge creasing, we want to have a good amount of density here. You can see here we have just like 4 polygons here, and that may not be enough density. So to help this out, we can select these 2 edges. So let's do a new apply modifier, and we can just increase the crease value for this. You can see how it helps to mitigate some of that value, some of that problem right there. And of course, when you render, you want to go up to like 5 iterations while keeping it, let's say 2 or 3 in the viewport, just for fast performance, especially if you have lots of objects here. So one of the downsides of using open subdiv and edge creasing is that you do need to have a greater number of subdivisions in order to get a better result and to get past some of these issues right here and right here as well. So if I render that, you can see this is what it looks like with 2 iterations, and then at 5 at render time, you can see how we get a much cleaner result. Let's also render this. And actually, this is another example where it's not quite sharp enough to capture it. So let's add this as well. As you can see, it looks much better at render time. And so after you're done with this, remember, this is a very good method for just previewing what your result may look like. But once you're done with that, you don't actually want to keep this. You want to go ahead and apply crease set. Select the appropriate edges here. And here's where you set up your final result. So here, you get a much more controlled version. But the data channel is for previewing it as you work. It's very useful for that. But here's where you do your final result. So I like to go ahead and create a set and just kind of see how it's looking, and I can kind of find problem areas. So for example, this right here, you can either add or update. I also like to go into edit poly and just clear all of them as well. This right here may be a topology issue. May need to just kind of move this a little bit. So sometimes when it comes to working with creases, you usually need to kind of modulate things here and there. For example, this right here, probably want to maybe add that to it. There we go. And probably want to make a separate set for this, just to control and improve that as well. Or just have greater density in that area. And so if I create a copy of this, we can see the difference between our final result using crease sets and then using data channel. You can see how data channel, some parts are too soft, some parts are too sharp. You can of course play around with that. But I think that using data channel is a great way to kind of preview things. Otherwise, you just have to kind of work with this during your whole result. So Using data channel allows you to get a more kind of accurate version of how your final model will look, while still having not everything be perfect, which you will of course clean up using crease set. You get a much more perfect result. And definitely makes a very big difference on this area, for example, because if you weren't using data channel, you would either have to just use a bunch of support loops, and that can be a huge pain, or you have to always go in here and use creases here, which can become very easily corrupted. So data channel, I think, is a very good solution for that. Previewing that, and then eventually fixing up with crease set and getting it to be perfect. Thank you for watching, and take care.